22 years ago, at a restaurant in Orlando, a man named Thad Roberts was arrested in a sting operation. He had stolen multiple millions of dollars worth of moon rocks from his employer, NASA. He justified the crime to himself in many ways. They were just sitting in a vault somewhere. Their loss wouldn't be noticed. They had already been studied. But if he was being honest with himself, and I expect he wasn't, he was just a thrill seeker, trying to impress a girl and make some money in the process. I would go to that restaurant now, but it hasn't existed for some time. Almost a decade later, Thad's story caught the attention of a writer with a knack for thrilling tales about bright young men. The author might not have known it at the time, but it would be the most controversial book he would ever write. Because if he was being honest with himself, and I expect he wasn't, he had fallen just a bit too much in love with a good story. And a decade after that, so would I. Well, here I am. Took a while to get it all sorted out, but I finally moved back to Orlando. Apartments all set up and everything. Absolutely nothing unaccounted for.
Fuck. I forgot to get a job.
I'm gonna need to find a way to make some money if I'm gonna pay my rent. Fortunately, I've been reading this book here and it gave me a great idea. I'll just do what he did. Write about a shy nerd that gets rich and someone will pay me to make a movie out of it. And I know just the nerd to write about. Ladies, gentlemen, cool people, it is my great honor to announce that the role of main character will be played tonight by author Ben Mezrich. You might know him as the guy that wrote the book that got adapted into the movie The Social Network. And this guy absolutely fascinates me. His writing is full of weird proclivities and patterns, and I'd like to explore them with you. If you'll let me explain. From the beginning, Ben wanted to be a writer. He was writing as early as high school, and kept it up through his college years at Harvard. He graduated in '91 and settled down in Boston as he attempted to launch his career. He took to the thriller genre, and promptly made no money. In 1999, however, he would get his first hit of a very specific drug. His second novel, Reaper, was adapted into a TV movie. The resulting product, Fatal Error, is exactly the sort of movie you think it is, and beyond being so dated that the plot hinges on a company inventing video conferencing, and being generally cheesy in the way TV thrillers from the era always are, was still an entertaining watch. Maybe I have low standards. It's about a computer virus that learns how to infect humans through their eyeballs. When you get infected, you get hit with the Solar Eyes filter in Photoshop. The competent but stuffy federal agent and the loose cannon doctor she reluctantly partners with and will inevitably fall in love with turn to a sassy blind hacker to investigate the virus, while the owner of the FaceTime company acts shady, and this other guy is here and doesn't do anything. Eventually they figure out the virus is coming from the FaceTime cable box thingy, and no! Blind hacker guy! They got him through his fingers. Anyways, the boring guy did it, and he ties Fed Lady up with computer cables, and Hot Doctor saves her, and they pour water on the servers, and the day is saved. Where was I? Mezrich's thriller era would continue for a short while, only interrupted by his brief stint as Mr. Massachusetts in Fox's Sexiest Bachelor in America.
Representing the old colony, Mr. Massachusetts.
Hi, my name is Ben Mezrich. I'm a novelist from Boston.
Then, at a party, he meets Jeff Ma. Jeff tells him he's got the story for his next book, and Ben's career takes an interesting turn. The story Jeff tells is the story of the MIT blackjack team, which he was recruited to join in the 90s, and which used a variety of cooperative card counting tricks to make a lot of money, until the casinos caught on and changed their operations to counter the counters. It's an interesting story, but there's only one problem. Ben Mezrich is not a nonfiction author. The term creative nonfiction has a lot of definitions, and there are a lot of styles under its umbrella, but it broadly boils down to the idea of writing factual material in the same way you would approach literature. An author might identify events that would make up a satisfying narrative arc and frame their writing around them, or use flowery prose to describe a true phenomenon. If you squint, you could even count this video as creative nonfiction. Ben takes a bit of a different approach. You know those movies that are based on a true story, but there's like composite characters and invented scenes and they change the order things happen and stuff? This is how Ben Mezrich writes his books. He treats them like he's writing a fictional thriller, and he's got this non-fictional story as the pitch that he was given to work with. But if the story reads better when he strays from it, he's gonna stray. The end result is a page-turning, tightly plotted novel with strong setups and payoffs and themes that hovers between cleanly retelling and standing vaguely adjacent to the material he started with. This is a major point of controversy for Mezrich, because his books are not movies. There is an expectation that film adaptations of true events will clean up the narrative in order to tell a good story in 2 hours. This is not true of books, where the accuracy of a work labeled as nonfiction is much more readily assumed. It's with this in mind that we're going to look at the end result of this process. Bringing Down the House, the inside story of 6 MIT students who took Vegas for millions, ... He titles his books like I title my videos. The book follows Jeff as he's recruited for the team by his friends Fisher and Martinez, who introduce him to Mickey Rosa, the team's leader and principal investor. They teach him the system the team uses, which I will sum up briefly. Most of the team consists of spotters, who sit at tables and place minimal bets to avoid arousing suspicion, while keeping track of the count. Once the table is likely to pay out, they signal to call in a gorilla, who joins them at the table and makes lavish bets and generally tries to act like someone who wouldn't be counting cards. Once the count goes cold, they move on to the next table. There's also the big players, who are basically gorillas that keep track of the count for themselves and do ballsier things. You can safely forget the gorilla exists, because everyone important to the story is a big player. They take Jeff to an underground casino in Chinatown where they test his skills, before finally taking him to Vegas and beginning his career as a big player. The team is wildly successful and makes many Vegas trips, but they encounter many challenges along the way. Fisher and Martinez want to be able to invest further in the team, but Rosa won't let them, so the team mutinies and cuts him out. Then, after an unrelated incident forcing one of the casinos to change their chip designs, the gang turns to the local stripper community to help exchange their stockpiled chips for new ones without arousing suspicion, because the strippers get tipped in chips, so the casino trusts that theirs are legit. Eventually, a surveillance contractor guy named Vincent Cole catches on to their system, and the casinos start banning the big players, and they get more and more desperate for one last win before they're forced out of the game. This causes them to have a falling out and break into 2 separate teams. See, Vincent Cole is bad news, because he once backroomed a card counter and made them swallow a poker chip whole at gunpoint. None of our guys are stupid enough to follow them to the back room, of course, because legally they can't force you to sign anything or go anywhere, but it doesn't matter because Fisher goes to a foreign casino when the American ones stop letting them play, and they beat him up in a public restroom anyway. And it's implied that Rosa ratted them out. And then one of Jeff's new team members has their apartment robbed, their safe full of winnings ripped out of the wall. Jeff goes home after all this and finds one single poker chip sitting on the counter, a sign that someone, maybe Cole, maybe Rosa, is watching him. A haunting final image. And done. How'd you like the book? Let's talk about it. Okay, so I'm gonna speed run through this bit. The underground casino thing didn't happen. The stripper chips thing didn't happen. The chip swallowing story isn't even a legend. No one's even heard of it. Fisher didn't get beaten up. The robbery was almost certainly an unrelated break-in. Ben inflated the amount of money stolen, and the safe was not ripped from the wall. And the final scene is completely fabricated. Along the way, we've been following characters like Mickey Rosa, or Fisher, or Martinez, or the entire rest of the team, all of whom are composites of several people, and we've mostly been reading invented conversations throughout all of it. This is what makes Ben so controversial. He took what was already an interesting story about a cool subject, and in turning it into a high-stakes thrill ride, essentially wrote a different story. I mean, in his own words.
The idea that the story is true is more important than being able to prove that it's true.
A running theme of this video is going to be that I infer that Ben Mezrich believes something, and then later I find a quote where he just says that. I'm not even going to use all of them, it wouldn't be sporting. Oh, Ben. Why must we do these things? Oh, wait, because it sells. Really, really well. So well, in fact, that for the second time in his life, he would get the coveted movie adaptation. And this time, on the big screen. Let's find out who produced it, damn it! 21 is a film based on the story presented in Bringing Down the House. Remember how earlier I talked about how movies are more willing to play with these things than books are? And how we just learned that the book is about 30% composed of shit Ben made up? Well, congratulations, because we've just stumbled upon the world's first film adaptation of the telephone game. In order to punch up the story and fit it into 2 hours, a lot has to be changed. Fisher and Martinez, already composite characters, get recomposited into one. We never learn the team dynamic of the strategy whatsoever, but we still see the signals, and we hear the term big player thrown around, which I feel would be confusing. The card counting itself has to get dumbed down a bit, which makes enough sense, but the side effect is that it makes the entire rest of the team look like complete idiots who can't do basic math without our protagonist, who, by the way, is now doing this to try and afford med school because apparently he needed a real motivation beyond making lots of money. Oh, and he's white now, and so is pretty much everyone else, despite the book explicitly stating that this was not the case in order to play off people's expectations of what a card counter looked like. But who knows? Maybe Ben made all that up in the book. Oh, also, while we're changing stuff, we're gonna make it so that Fisher gets kicked off the team instead of leading a mutiny, so we can see more of Kevin Spacey. Great. There's a lot of other changes, which I'll list here. But the last really big one is that the entire ending is new, and it involves they renamed him, Ben, selling out Rosa to Vincent Cole, who also forces him to give him all the money he's made. We're gonna circle back to the name thing real quick. Did they rename the main character after Ben Mezrich? What even is this movie? We end on Ben telling a scholarship recruiter guy his story, which is honestly a fitting way to frame a story that was told secondhand to an author who cut it to pieces and made it into a movie that cut the pieces into pieces. Oh, and also the movie was bad, I didn't like it. The success of the book and the film gave Ben a lot of notoriety, and he pivoted his career towards his newfound style of nonfiction. He became very good at finding and telling stories like this. In fact, at the premiere of 21, he met someone who, just like Jeff, had a great story for one of his books. But we'll get there in a bit. Because I don't have all day, we're not going to deep dive into the accuracy of all his books going forward, so just remember that anything that gets filtered through Ben has to be taken with a grain of salt. Now, a lesser man's analysis of Ben Mezrich might have ended here, with his factual inaccuracy. But we're just getting started, for you see, I've been hiding something from you. It's time we talk about the pattern. Ben Mezrich, for the most part, has a fascination with telling this one story, which is the story I'm going to tell you now. It's about an absolute loser. Shy nerd, cannot for the life of him get laid. He usually lives in Boston, and he usually goes to a prestigious school. One day, he learns something secret about the world, something no one else knows, and it's going to help him do some amazing things. He's going to make a lot of money, he's going to go to a lot of parties, and he's going to meet a lot of women. But it's all going to go to his head eventually. Sometimes he finds himself alienating all his friends. Sometimes he makes the world's worst decisions. And sometimes the system just realizes that there's an underdog out there and tries to stop him. In the end, maybe he'll make out with the money. Maybe it'll all come crashing down on him. But either way, he can look back at it later and realize that for a while there, he was that cool. Basically, it's the plot of a mob movie, except the main character's a Redditor. Not every book Ben writes follows this exact pattern, but it's a heck of a lot of them. Look at this one. Straight Flush, the true story of 6 college friends who dealt their way to a billion-dollar online poker empire, and how it all came crashing down. Checks every box except Boston. How about Rigged, the true story of an Ivy League kid who changed the world of oil from Wall Street to Dubai? Absolutely. Busting Vegas, a true story of monumental excess, sex, love, violence, and beating the odds? Yep. Ugly Americans, the true story of the Ivy League cowboys who raided the Asian markets for millions? Yes, sir. This brings us to the next stop on our tour. In 2009, Ben would put out the book that turned into the movie you clicked on this video for, The Accidental Billionaires, the founding of Facebook, a tale of sex, money, genius, and betrayal. You better believe it checks all the boxes. Another Mezrich special. For this one, Ben spoke with Eduardo Saverin, who he met at the premiere of 21, I told you we'd get there, and told a story about Facebook that I can only describe as innocently 2009 core. I find it so fascinating how this book goes so hard into challenging Mark Zuckerberg, challenging Facebook the company, and then completely fails to question Facebook the product in any significant capacity. In a post-Cambridge Analytica world, the portrayal of Facebook as a public good, digital fire stolen for us by a modern Prometheus, is laughably quaint. Now, what's interesting is that when the book was optioned for a potential film, it wasn't actually a book yet. Ben wrote a few pages of a pitch that he immediately sent to studios, and only continued writing the book once he got an option. This is a play he would make many times going forward. The consequences of this were that Aaron Sorkin didn't actually base his script off much of Mezrich's work. They did independent research and writing, only met a few times to share notes during production, and Sorkin's draft was nearly finished by the time he got to read Mezrich's manuscript. The Social Network crediting Ben almost feels like it's a finder's fee, though I'm sure their note comparisons were significant, because the movie, like the book, chooses to center itself around Eduardo Saverin and his side of the story. Am I going to talk about the movie now, even though I don't have much to say about the book? Yes. You can complain when your movie is one of the best of the decade and has Andrew Garfield in it. God, how refreshing it is to watch a good movie after sitting through 21. The Social Network has style. The deposition framing device is such a good way to bounce around the story, the writing is so tight, and Zuckerberg is written to be intelligent and an asshole, but it never lets him get away with pretending that one is because of the other. I could talk about this confrontation scene for like an hour. I've rewatched it like 5 times writing this script. The Trent Reznor score I shamelessly ripped off earlier is so good, dude. God. Okay, I'm done, let's move on. Well, there is one important thing about the movie that I want to mention, but it's more a thing about the book. See, as we know, Ben Mezrich has a very particular writing style, and when he has to construct a scene out of thin air, he just does that, authoritatively. So it's really weird that The Accidental Billionaires has a few scattered uses of hypothetical imagery in there. Like, just little occasional moments where we're asked to picture it in our heads instead of just being told what happened. Most notably, we're going to look at Chapter 33, CEO. Here's how it goes down in the movie. In case you've never seen The Social Network, the gist of the entire plot is that Mark Zuckerberg trades in his friendship with co-founder Eduardo Saverin for his new friendship with Napster founder Sean Parker, who tells him everything he wants to hear and promises to grow the company with him. Just after the big confrontation scene that I've rewatched 8 times now comes a shock, as Sean gets arrested at a party with underage interns and drugs. He calls Mark, who's alone in the Facebook offices, and we watch as he slowly realizes that Sean was bad news the whole time, and he's gonna have to drop him. The man who helped him build the empire he sits on is now a liability, and he finds himself alone at the top, and he's lonely as shit. He ends the scene by looking at his freshly arrived box of business cards, with the inscription that Sean himself pitched. "I'm CEO, bitch." The card almost taunts him with the callous naivete of his mistake. The book follows this scene beat for beat. Sean gets arrested, Mark's working late at the offices when he gets the call, he reflects on the situation, and ends by staring at the business card. It's too similar to be a coincidence, so we know this scene was a result of Mezrich and Sorkin's collaboration. But strangely, this entire chapter is written in the hypothetical. We imagine Zuck to be at the offices. We imagine their phone call. We imagine the way he looks at the business card. It's almost as if Aaron Sorkin wrote this scene first, and Ben reverse adapted it into his book. Even if Sorkin just provided the idea, I feel pretty good about my theory here. He's never written in this style in any of his other books that I've checked, including the other ones to get film adaptations. And remember, if I'm wrong, what we have here is Ben Mezrich writing a scene exactly like he's pitching how cool it'll look in the movie. It's a weird little scene. But there's one last detail I forgot to mention. Remember how Sorkin's version of this moment is a somber reflection on how Facebook's rise destroyed Mark's personal relationships? Let's take a look at how Mezrich closes out the scene.
Mark wouldn't let anything or anyone stand in the way of Facebook. What Mark Zuckerberg had become could best be illustrated by the business card, simple and elegant, with a single sentence printed across the center, that he created, most likely sitting in his computer, the screen glowing across his face. The business card that he would have printed out to carry with him everywhere. We can picture Mark reading the words in the card aloud to himself, the smallest tint of a grin twitching across his usually impassive face. "I'm CEO, bitch."
Huh, that's weird. It's almost like Ben's version is painting Zuckerberg to be a badass who's alone at the top but is having a great time because he's so cool. I hope none of you know what the word foreshadowing means. The thing about The Social Network is that it wasn't just successful, it was a cultural moment. Ben knew exactly what he had, because a few years later he would kick off a tech bro bender, straying from the formula for some good old trend chasing. He wrote a book about Bitcoin, he just finished one about Elon Musk buying Twitter, and there's a third one we'll be covering later. But before any of that, he would write about our good friend Thad Roberts. And in doing so, he gave the whole game away. So the thing is, I'm sure you've noticed it, Ben Mezrich is a Ben Mezrich protagonist, right? He went to Harvard, he was a nerd, I don't know for sure if he got laid, but his hair looked like this. And one day he realized that he could use his brain to do something amazing. Write about nerds becoming big shot successes. And suddenly he's making money, he gets invited to Hollywood after parties and premieres and the Oscars, he gets put on talk shows and everyone wants to interview him. He wrote his way into everything he wrote about. So what if he embellishes his stories a bit? So what if he sells the movie before he writes the book? In 2011, Mezrich gave us yet another pattern book, Sex on the Moon, the amazing story behind the most audacious heist in history. And in doing so, he accidentally revealed his hand just a bit too much. The book follows the story of Thad Roberts. Remember him from the beginning? Thad studied at the University of Utah and found his way into a prestigious internship at NASA. The pay was shitty and the housing was shittier, but no one cared because you were there and you got to dream of how nice it would be to stay. So basically the Disney college program. Thad found himself developing a reputation as a do-anything, go-anywhere party animal. He snuck into a flight simulator in his first weeks just to have a good story to tell his friends. He organized adventures for the other interns, kept finding his way into places he shouldn't be, and even found himself befriending Dr. Everett Gibson, a noted materials scientist. And also he started cheating on his wife. Thad Roberts is routinely shown to be someone with very high impulsivity, very high confidence in himself, and very little respect for rules. He wanted more than anything to reinvent himself as a cool guy, and he took great risks to make that happen. So with all of this context in mind, why does Ben Mezrich seem to like him so much? Every time we see Thad do something, we get to read his rationalizations, and even though they mostly boil down to wanting to impress people, they're given weight like that's a good enough reason to do it. He eventually learns of the Moonrock Vault, where a large cache of old rocks are being stored, that aren't usable in experiments anymore and are considered trash. We follow as he slowly convinces himself that stealing them would be morally justifiable, but even though his arguments are weaker than this analogy, Ben never seems to write it that way. When he commits the robbery, we get a twist when it's revealed he changed his plan to actually rob the private vault of Dr. Gibson, where rocks he is actively experimenting with are being kept, along with personal artifacts, and this is dropped on us with absolutely no challenge to Thad's actions. Eventually we learn that Gibson's notebooks with years of research have also gone missing, and were stored in the same safe, but Thad's claim that he never saw them is taken at face value. We're given description after description of how cool and badass and James Bond he feels robbing his friend and employer and government, and you slowly realize that that's all you'll ever get. It's all he had. And as the titular scene approaches, where he sprinkles moondust over a hotel bed so that he and his side piece can celebrate a heist well done, you sit there and wonder why this person is being written like a folk hero. Sure, Mezrich interviewed Thad for the book, so he probably did get a lot of his perspective on the matter, and sure the book is written from that perspective, but is it not a little concerning that nowhere in the entire thing is there ever a genuine consideration for the validity of Thad's motivations? Take this paragraph, for example, where Thad, having appointed himself to the task of organizing outings for the interns, leads everyone on a camping trip to a granite dome.
It wasn't exactly legal to be camping right there on top of the dome. There were signs all over the park warning against it, but Thad had felt an obligation to his little crew of co-ops and interns. They were his charges, and he was their social director. A stupid park ranger's whimsical rules shouldn't be allowed to keep the nation's finest budding scientists away from a view like this.
The entire book is written like this. Thad embellishes every story he tells, is considerate of nothing but his own desire to be liked, and generally acts like a dipshit, and Ben publishes it uncritically. And then it hits you that Ben Mezrich, Mr. Massachusetts himself, still that kid from Harvard with dreams of making it big someday, sat down to talk to Thad Roberts and saw in him exactly the sort of thing he wanted to. A smart loser who turned himself into a popular guy that got invited to parties and had sex with girls. Call it getting enamored by a smooth talker or call it plain respect, but either way it turns up in the pages. It's hard to get around to questioning his actions when you're so busy idolizing his lifestyle. Let us turn once again to the ultimate authority on Ben Mezrich, Ben Mezrich.
Are your characters heroes or villains?
Zuckerberg has definitely done things that seem pretty bad. The bottom line is that he might have stolen things and have a megalomaniacal goal of subjugating the world, but he did invent Facebook. My role is to tell the story, not to judge. Nobody sees themselves as the villain.
Do you see yourself in the same vein as your Robin Hood characters?
No, I'm terrified of everything. I've never taken on any system. In a revolution, I want to wait to see who wins, and that's the person I bow to. I live vicariously through these characters.
Man, it just writes itself. Hey, there's another interview question in this article.
You're good at spotting culture-shifting technological singularities. What's next?
Well, NFTs are pretty neat.
Alright, side tangent. As part of the whole tech bro Bender thing, he got really into crypto, and part of that was releasing his own BenFTs. Let's check out his website, benmezrichnft.com. Oh. Well, I guess the movie he's writing that all these NFTs are supposed to be ownership stakes in isn't happening then. Oh well. Can't option the book, won't write the book, am I right, Ben? But enough making fun of him for being a crypto guy. Back to making fun of him for uncritically idolizing anyone who gets invited to parties. Look, I'm not trying to psychoanalyze this guy. I know not what is in his heart. But I've read a lot of his writing, and I've seen a lot of his interviews, and the pattern is there. The man does not miss an opportunity to describe a lavish party. His books all have these scenes of rich people and hot girls and expensive liquor, and it all feels so gratuitously indulgent. His main characters become the coolest people in the world and have everything and everyone they've ever wanted, because Ben Mezrich can't bear to paint them as anything less. I don't know if he's genuinely jealous, or maybe he just gets to know them when he interviews them and now he likes them too much to be mean to them in his books, but whatever it is, it's a serious problem. Even when the main character isn't interested in living it up and having sex with hot women, he finds a way to write about someone who is. For a man with such an accuracy problem as Ben Mezrich, knowing his bias towards his subjects makes him a whole lot less trustworthy. Somehow. Sex on the Moon reviewed poorly compared to prior efforts, and all for the same reason. Thad Roberts, despite the book's best attempts to refute this, comes off as a selfish ass. He was a dumb kid at the time, sure, but taking his dumb kid arguments seriously and presenting them uncritically actually makes it look even worse. Ben Mezrich's deal had been fully exposed, but there was no reason to stop there. After this point, Ben's reputation among readers had solidified itself pretty firmly. Amusingly, it's often the same exact elements of his style that his fans and his critics point to first. Here, let's read some Goodreads reviews for one of his books.
The story told in this book was fascinating, but I found the creative nonfiction method employed in telling it way too creative. I actually spent the first 30 pages or so trying to make sure the book was actually nonfiction at all. The book seemed in such a rush to be fascinating and to set up scenes for the already optioned movie that it failed to come across as serious. I wanted a bit less creativity and narrative, and a few more facts.
Is this fiction? It absolutely reads like an adventurous fiction work, which I kind of liked.
I don't think I'm going to keep reading this book. Barely even non-fiction. I was very uncomfortable with the novelistic invented dialogue and scene setting, all of which is unnecessary if the source material is interesting.
Mezrich takes us on a fast-paced, highly readable tour through South Korean cloning facilities, bustling Harvard genetics labs, and desolate Siberian tundra. Mezrich's distinctive style of narrative nonfiction brings the characters to life.
This felt clumsily written and half-told, only cool for random mammoth facts. Also, this guy is way too high on Harvard supply. Get over it.
This is a fascinating book written by an excellent writer who has a gift for making historical events read like dramatic thrillers.
Meh, I could have bumped it a star or two if it didn't have such blatant misogyny. That was added in for, what, colorful effect? I don't know, but it felt like stepping on a Lego.
Oh, how'd that last one get in there? Whoops. Oh no, here's another one from another one of his books.
This book does a good job of explaining the saga of AbsolutePoker.com and the crash of the online poker industry in a compelling way, but it's just so horny. It can't even go one chapter without a graphic, leering description of the glamorous models and sex workers who flock around them and their money. It's like if you mashed up a 60 Minutes expose with a particularly race fetishy episode of Girls Gone Wild.
Oh god, I'm so sorry. Another one got in here.
Lol, this was so bad, but also entertaining. Basically what would be produced if a frat president had an assignment to write about his wildest dreams.
Oh fuck, they just keep showing up.
Mezrich has a gift for finding these amazing stories and then failing terribly at telling them. He never focuses on anything interesting in his books, choosing instead to spend paragraphs describing women's bodies rather than building tension and talking about the story. He never bothers to explain what an IPO is, but he wastes a solid paragraph describing the over-lipsticked pantsuited appearance of an unimportant bank teller in Montana. Yawn.
Okay, I think I stopped it. Yeah, so one could argue that this is a pattern of his, and some of it is just that he over-describes women's appearances, but there's a distinctive gaze to his writing. It's really hard to explain the vibe it gives off when you're just taking lines out of context, but so you know I'm trying, here's a few examples.
By 10 p.m. he knew the house behind him would be throbbing with good music, foaming with decent beer, and most importantly of all, teeming with pretty girls. And girls, of course, were the currency that held the whole system together. The girls gave the place a bit of a Mardi Gras feel. Of course, the balcony babes had been Pete's idea. Garen had to give him that. He was one hell of a marketing genius. He glanced at the woman, trying not to be too obvious. She was tall, with long auburn hair, smoke-colored eyes, and high cheekbones. She was wearing a silk halter top that barely contained her unnaturally round breasts, and a sliver of tan abdomen was showing above her tight leather pants. She was the epitome of the Vegas girl, the sort of woman you saw in the arm of a celebrity in the high-stakes pits, or whisking through a VIP line at a trendy nightclub. Women like her did not exist in Boston, and even if they did, they wouldn't have socialized with the whiz kids at MIT. White slavery, Martinez responded, fighting Fisher for the last piece of fish. You're just lucky you're like the rest of us. He crossed his eyes. His mother was from Singapore, his father from Cuba. His family tree was made of so many different races, you needed a pie chart to buy him a birthday present.
Right, there was also some racial stuff in there. Anyways, as I said earlier, Ben realized that Silicon Valley has the whole young genius takes over the world thing on lock, and he pivoted hard towards chasing current events. First up is Bitcoin Billionaires, which is about the Winklevoss twins getting into crypto, and that is the last sentence I will be giving that. And then came The Anti-Social Network, about the GameStop meme stock thing, which is named as though it's a sequel to the movie and not the book, which is doubly funny when you find out that this one also got adapted into a movie and they changed the title to Dumb Money. I'm so excited for his next book to get titled Dumber Money and get turned into a film called Bringing Down the House. But let's talk about the movie a bit. Dumb Money is a decently competent film about Keith Gill, the guy who essentially spoke the GameStop squeeze into existence. And yes, he's from Boston. The book and movie follows a bit of an ensemble of different people invested in GameStop to try and sell the idea of the squeeze as a citizen's revolt. It kinda gives Last Act Truman Show vibes with everyone watching along. Because this movie doesn't have a main character who gets to go to parties, we get to see the rich short sellers living it up before they get taken down a peg by Paul Dano eating tendies.
Sorry. Quick tendy break. Gotta love those tendies. Sweet, sweet tendies.
Also, yes, it's trying very hard to justify the Redditor favorite words list, and let me tell you, it is not succeeding. I know they're joking, guys. That doesn't make me think it's funny for everyone to be throwing around the R word. It wasn't funny when 21 did it either, and they did it before Tropic Thunder, which we've all collectively agreed was the last movie that got to do that. Also, America Ferrera's character is a Trump supporter in the book and in real life, and the movie chose to leave this out so she reads as sympathetic. I strongly advise you to just watch Dan Olson's video about this whole thing instead. It wasn't a bad movie, I don't regret watching it. It's just that The Social Network is so much better, and I think I had more fun with Fatal Error, even though on a technical level this movie is definitely superior. 21 is firmly in last place. And that's all the movies reviewed. A couple more of Ben's books got optioned, but nothing's come of it yet. And he just sold another Not Yet a book a couple weeks ago even. That would be the end of it, if not for one loose thread. You see, a couple years ago he started writing fiction again, specifically children's books, and it seems in the process he may have stepped into my turf. That's right, Ben Mezrich wrote a book about Disney World. It's called Bringing Down the Mouse, and that's odd. It's about a really smart kid from Boston who gets recruited for a group that's planning to win at carnival games using mathematical strategies. Ben, you didn't happen to launder your first successful adult book into a children's book by aging down all the people and concepts involved, did you? Oh god, that's exactly what you did. See, the problem is that card counting is a very specific subject, and trying to find an analogous concept for a team of kids to engage in is hard. So he landed on carnival games. The problem is that most carnival games are won with physical skills, so he needs to adapt most of the math skills out. But the main character needs to be smart to be the protagonist of a Ben Mezrich book, so he has to add in a mathematical game to be the focus. So there's a wheel that he has to spin where he figures out the probability or something. But he has to be specifically recruited for the team in the story, so it has to be something only he can do. But Ben doesn't actually figure that one out, so he just pretends there's no way to calculate the probability in advance, and also no one else on the team can do math. Oh, and they need to fly to the carnival games for this to follow the book, so we have them go to totally not Disney World. Except Ben's a smart fella, and he knows that Disney doesn't have carnival games anywhere that isn't Dinoland, so he has to come up with the idea of a limited time event in the park that involves a bunch of carnival games just completely ruining the atmosphere of Main Street, just to make it all work together. Add in some light plot streamlining and some park mascot humor that's the same jokes you've seen everywhere else, and you've got a classic on your hands. Honestly, my primary takeaway when reading this was that Ben Mezrich clearly has a fondness for Disney parks on some level, because a lot of his fictionalized park draws clear and specific inspiration from Walt Disney World. He gives us a rundown of the shops on Main Street, he describes the man-made lagoon and the original resort properties the park opened with. He named a building Moonbase Alpha. I mean, I stalked his Instagram, I know he visited recently. These aren't the details you care to include if you didn't genuinely enjoy the parks. And don't think I didn't catch you comparing the NASA campus to Epcot and Sex on the Moon either. But while we're here, some brief notes on theme park design, Ben. Incredoland is a very generic name for a park that's clearly intended to riff on Epcot and Tomorrowland specifically. The icon of the park being 300 feet tall would require it to have signaling lights for planes, which I suppose is less of an issue if it's themed to a space station, but it would also dominate the sightlines of everything in the park, way beyond serving as a weenie. The Marsland having paths covered in red dust that you can kick up would be a nightmare to maintain, and Custodia would spend their entire day removing footprints from the other paths and most things within reach of guests' feet. Why is the pool at the hotel shaped like Loopy the Space Mouse? You don't even describe it like it's a hidden Mickey shape, you explicitly said rodent-shaped. What the hell does that mean? The Haunted Mansion equivalent here is called the Haunted Moon, which, honestly no notes, I think I covered that right in one of my videos last year. The hotel is themed to Mercury, and also it's supposed to be the Polynesian for some reason. Neither of those equate to rodent pool, by the way, but why are we treating the park being built on swampland as some kind of dark secret? The fact that the company used dummy corporations to buy the land for cheap is used as justification for the team bending the rules to win at the carnival games, like the original sin of the land having been bought cheaply makes it okay to cheat, which is a terribly odd thing to write in a book based on a story primarily set at Indian casinos. But hey, what happens in Vegas stays in Incredoland, right? Ben and his wife would team up for his next lightly laundered children's book adventure, which is based on Sex on the Moon? Yes, that's right. He actually fucking did this. He changes the plot of this one significantly, for obvious reasons, basically just rewriting Bringing Down the House again, but with a backdrop of moonrock theft. It's weighed down by the unfortunate choice not to set it at a theme park, so I won't be discussing it further. Nor will I discuss the other 2 books in this series, whose inspirations I leave as an exercise to the viewer. It's kind of funny how often Orlando and Disney references come up in his writing. I mean, it's like he followed me here from back home. Come to think of it, home was pretty close to... It was right in front of me the whole time. I'm a shy nerd from an hour outside of Boston. I certainly can't pull the ladies, or the gents, or anyone else. And I want to be a successful creator someday. And I found someone to write about, who got all the success I ever wanted, doing exactly what I wanted to do. I'm worse than Ben Mezrich. I'm... derivative. Is it possible that I've just been projecting this whole time? Do I only see these things in his writing because I'm seeing it in my own? Do I just want to believe that we're all as desperate and crazy as I am? What am I doing with myself? On the 1st of June, 2013, Alex Halperin wrote a piece for Salon titled, "I Like My Imagined Literary Nemesis." Alex sees the same things in Ben's work that I do. The inaccuracy, the indulgence, the projection. So much so that he grew to consider him a personal antagonist. And then, by chance, he got the opportunity to interview him. And in the end...
Mezrich's work commits crimes great and small against my profession. But I'm not under the illusion that many people care. In person, Mezrich is hard to dislike. He's charming, fast-talking, and self-justifying when necessary. Few people can be expected to agree when you imply their livelihood is a fraud.
Maybe the real story here is the power of the interview. A magical tool that turns unseen forces into people that you can't help but avoid hurting too badly. Or maybe Ben's just a nice guy, trying his best to write the sort of books he wants to be reading, and I'm just not in his target demographic. Or maybe he's a hack. Who even knows anymore? With that in mind, I want to talk to you, Ben. I saw you liked my tweet about you. Maybe you're watching this right now. I'm sorry if I was harsh, Ben, but I needed to work through my feelings about you and your career. I was just thinking, you love to give interviews, and clearly it seems to help people come around about you. And I suspect you're a Disney guy. If you're watching this, Ben, would you like to come on my Patreon podcast and talk about theme parks? We don't have to bring up anything else. I just think it would be fun. But in any case, I think it's okay to acknowledge that we have a little in common, even if our tastes steer us in different directions. We're all trying to find the thing that works for us. As for me, I set out to talk about a weird guy, and I think I succeeded. I guess what I'm trying to say is, my role is to tell the story, not to judge. Nobody sees themselves as the villain. In 2014, Ben made his return to adult fiction with the novel 7 Wonders, and he would follow it up with The Midnight Ride in 2022. They're both still thrillers, of course, his favorite genre. But there's something different. I don't plan to revisit Ben's catalog anytime soon, but if I do, I think I'll give those a read next.